Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning here on the East Coast in the U.S. It's great to be with you all today and look forward to discussing the future of work with this great crowd. To introduce myself quickly, I'm Rachel Lipson. I'm the director of the Project on Workforce at Harvard. I'll tell you all a little bit about our work shortly. We are a cross-school and cross-disciplinary initiative at Harvard University, where we bring together the business school, the policy school, and the education school at the institution to think about questions related to the future of work and the intersection of education and labor markets. Grounded in that theory is the idea that really making change and creating more pathways into good jobs for more people is going to require collaboration across sectors and across disciplines, and not going to be solved by business or by government or by educators alone. And so that's really at the root of the research that we are trying to do at the project. So just some grounding for my remarks today. When we think about the future of work, so much of the changes are really grounded in a lot of ways in the changes in technology in our economy. So I like this graph because I think it makes things really concrete and visible. This is based on some research from Gordon, but today's machines can do, in terms of output, can do 90% of what humans did in 1900. Technology has shifted over the last few centuries, but we have seen some of these especially rapid changes over the last few years. And that's had impacts on the kinds of jobs that are available. So this is data from industrialized countries and primarily in OECD, but these themes hold true in a lot of places. You can see the decline in those countries, particularly in manufacturing employment. So as technology has grown and the nature of globalization has shifted, in some countries we're really seeing a pretty steady decline in citizens and residents working in manufacturing jobs, particularly as manufacturing employment, manufacturing industry at large becomes more productive and more technologies become introduced. So a lot of the work that my colleagues and I are focusing on here at Harvard has been really centered on the growing importance of soft skills for the future of work. This is some data from the labor market data firm Burning Glass, and you can see the growth of what they call some of these baseline skills, or these are foundational skills that are widely requested and widely required across a wide range of occupations, industries, and job roles. Things like communication skills, teamwork, problem solving, writing. So these are some of the skills that are growing the fastest. And then you can see them complemented by some of these jobs, some of these types of skills that are required in other kinds of roles, but are also broadly transferable, things like Microsoft Word and Office or Excel. And so this has some pretty significant implications for the future of work. As we look back over the last few decades, this is data from the US economy and from my colleague, David Deming at Harvard's Kennedy School and Graduate School of Education. But what we're seeing in the US is that the jobs that are growing the fastest don't only include some of these soft or social skills, but it's a combination of the two. So soft skills and technical skills combined, those are the job categories that have been growing the fastest over the last few decades. And then you can see on this graph, what's really been declining are what you might call routine skills. So the types of things that are easily automatable across by machines or technology. So in the US context, and I think in a lot of other countries, one of the big questions are going to be, as we try to build and grow these types of human skills, especially soft and social skills, how do we teach them And then how do we recognize and measure them accurately in the hiring process? We know, unfortunately, oftentimes these types of skills become proxies for discrimination. And so employers are not necessarily so good in the past at being able to judge whether someone has these skills off the bat, of whether they work well in teams or communicate well. And instead, oftentimes cultural norms become embedded into that process, and you may perpetuate inequities that have transpired in the past, rather than being able to use soft skills to open up doors to more opportunities. In many countries, you can see this through, because we don't have a good way for measuring soft skills, instead, you may use other proxies like educational attainment to decide who is qualified for roles or not. In other cases, it's a pretty subjective judgment on the part of a hiring manager. So there has been a lot of movement, though, in this space over the past few years and decades. So here's some data on investments in workforce assessment technologies. So this is the types of technologies that companies are using to try to better measure things like soft skills, or just to understand their applicant pools off the bat. Many of you may be working in these hiring fields and know that have seen the growth of these types of technologies in your own role. But lots of investment and lots of new types of products that have been coming out to try to make that assessment product for talent, assessment process more straightforward, more direct, and easier for employers. However, I do think we should caution and wonder here about whether artificial intelligence and machine learning are actually going to be able to better assess the true human potential of all applicants, or if it's just going to be a way of further filtering out one set of applicants from others. So here's some data from my colleague at Harvard Business School, Joe Fuller, and it's looked at, it's asking firms about whether they believe that their organization's hiring system is actually filtering out people who could really do the job, but don't exactly fit the criteria in the job description. And you can see these really high shares of respondents saying yes. So I'm sure you're going to talk about this more in sessions today, but the role of artificial intelligence in either creating or inhibiting opportunity is going to be a really important question for the distribution of the future of work and how it affects our workers and economies. Another trend that I'm watching right now is how COVID is affecting the future of work, and particularly the intersection of the future of work and the future of education. So this is US polling data from 2020, but I do think it applies in a lot of other contexts and geographies around the world as well. And it's looking at respondents and asking them if additional education is going to be worth the cost. And at least in this poll from Strata, we saw some really significant declines over the course of the pandemic in the share of respondents that truly believe that education was going to be the pathway to enable them to get to a better job. So you can see that in 2019, 37% of respondents said that additional education will be worth the cost, and that went all the way down to only 18% who strongly agree with that statement in 2020. And then on the right side, the question was, does additional education, will it make me an attractive job candidate to potential employers, or will it get me a good job? And again, pre-pandemic in 2019, 56% of the respondents strongly agree with that statement. And only 24% in 2020 agree with that statement. So I think some questions right now about kind of the challenges that the education system at large is facing in its in its relevance and applicability and ability to kind of transition people from training and into the good jobs of the future. So again, a part of our work at the Project on Workforce has focused on this idea that the challenges inherent in the future of work are not going to be addressed by one single sector or actor alone, meaning that it will cross policy, education, and business. You can see here some data from Harvard Business School's Managing the Future of Work project, particularly around preparedness for the future of work, where they surveyed workers in countries around the world around some of the trends that may affect their ability to change jobs in the future and companies' ability to feel ready for some of the changes that were coming. And you can see some of the obstacles that were cited here that I think are quite interesting because they cross, again, these are not going to be solved necessarily only by an individual or only by their government, but instead require attention and energy from educators and from business as well. So the largest share of respondents here cited the costs of retraining, reskilling, and learning to be a major obstacle that might prevent them from being able to prepare for the future of work. You can also see folks here citing that they don't have time to invest. There's also a lot of navigational questions of what are the options for me? How can I make sense of the different types of jobs or training or education that might be available? And then so a lot of themes here around guidance and really providing the set of supports that can help workers and learners navigate what is an increasingly complex system of opportunity or sometimes lack thereof. So that I wanted to bring to your all's attention is that the private sector, I think, can play a really huge role in being able to help workers acquire new skills that are relevant over the course of the entirety of their working lifetime. However, in many cases, unfortunately, we've seen that the distribution of spending within companies is often highly skewed towards the upper end of the income distribution within their wage earners. So most of the training spend, this is relatively old data from Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, but you can see this distribution that most of the spending in companies goes towards workers who hold higher education degrees, and pretty small shares that were going towards the workers who, before even entering that role, who did not have university degrees or credentials. And this is a trend that I think it will be important to change if we want all workers to be resilient, adaptable, be able to grow into the changing types of skills and opportunities that the future of work is going to present. How do we make more opportunities within work, within job roles for that types of work-based learning, advancement, and opportunity to acquire that new learning and new skills. So this is my final slide. I ask, is the future of education ready for the future of work? Again, this is US polling data, but interested to hear from you all how much this does or doesn't resonate in the MENA region. But you can see some of the factors that learners are citing as critical and important for the future of work as they make selections about education programs. And I think some of the traditional education programs that we've seen in the past are being challenged in new ways to meet these growing demands. So learners are looking to see, is there value? Is this going to help me in my job and career? Is it streamlined? Is it going to be fast? Is it something that I won't have to leave the workforce for many years or lose earnings for many years in order to acquire? And is it convenient to me in my lifestyle? Can I watch my kids at home? Can I take care of family members while I do it? Then you see this number one category here on relevance. Is this something that is actually going to be required in the field of work that I work in? And does this feel like it applies to the day-to-day work that I do on the job? And then a final piece here on stackability. So is the education that I require, does it build towards larger attainment over time? Can I do one piece at a time and be able to really build on that for the future? So that's my last slide here. I'm looking forward to your questions and the conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. We have a question of, do you think university degrees will still be relevant in the next 5 years?
I think in the next 5 years, I would say yes. I see some pressures on the traditional university system right now, many of which have been accelerated during the pandemic, but there's a lot that remains to be seen, and so many of our hiring systems are embedded for many decades and are structurally ingrained within the economy. So I don't think that change is going to be as fast as 5 years. That said, I do think in the next 5 years, we're going to continue to see the growth of relevance of some other types of alternative credentials, whether they be boot camps or other types of providers that are not accredited in the traditional way. I do think in some cases we're going to see those types of providers have growing relevance and popularity.
Absolutely. And our actually next panel discussion is on exactly that. So it's going to be Wonderful. An interesting contribution to that. Another question is, how do you see the public sector's role in upskilling, reskilling public workers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think they play a really important role. The first piece is around, look, on some of these questions on capital constraints, I don't think that the market is always going to work perfectly to provide opportunities for educational attainment and retraining on its own. And so a first piece is that we really need governments to be able to provide some of that capital to enable people to go back and learn. In most countries in the world, historically, what we've seen is so much of that investment has been weighted towards youth. And the first 20 to 25 years of life is the vast majority of educational spending. And as we head into the new frontier, I do think we're going to see a growing need for government to provide investments that also span later stages of life and help adult workers and other types of retraining workers find the opportunity to invest in their skills as well. Another big piece, I think, for government can be what I was talking about around the foundational and transferable skills. So when companies do the training, they have a lot of incentive to provide what you might call the job-specific skills. So let me teach you something that's very relevant and very particular to your company and to your role. And I think, when you think about the role of the public sector, a lot of this has to be around how can we enable people to be able to move across different companies and different roles. So some of those types of skills I was talking around working in teams or communication or language skills. When we think about the role of the system that's funded by the public, I think in a lot of ways they should be focused on that piece of providing these foundational and transferable skills that are not just going to lead you into one particular role or potentially get you stuck within one company, but allow workers and learners to move around to different types of opportunities as the economy changes. I can't hear you, Dia.
Mute, as usual. Do you think also they can move across industries as well? So it's not really related to a specific industry anymore.
I think we are going to see growing need for that and growing ability to do so. But again, this is also an important role for whether it be the public sector or for anyone who's in a role where they provide guidance and support to a learner and a job seeker, because people don't necessarily naturally always think about what I've learned either in a university setting or in a prior job, how is that applicable and relevant to another type of industry or role that I might not have thought about in the past. I think the pandemic has really brought this to light for a lot of folks when we saw, large shares of displacement in hospitality roles. Yeah. People had to kind of take a step back and reconsider, where are the skills that I learned, say like customer service, where might that be relevant in a healthcare setting, whether it be working with families of patients who are in hospitals, or maybe it's going into the education sector. But I think that became real for a lot of people in a lot of ways over the last year and a half, that because we've had such a huge macro shock, that the path that you thought, or the industry you thought you might be in forever, may not be the ultimate destination. But I also think that there's a lot of research right now that is showing that, again, for these soft skills in particular, they really are transferable across a wide range of settings and fields. And so what we need to do is really invest in making those transitions smoother, so that people can both recognize and where they might go next, and then really actualize that. What are the sets of supports that are going to be needed, change possible and feasible for the individual.
Amazing. Actually, we still have a few questions, but unfortunately we ran out of time. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today. This has been very interesting and insightful.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.